He thought his past was behind him. A hard-working man, finally rebuilding his life, finally finding peace. But one file, one hidden document, was about to change everything. Without warning, a racist officer dug into his records, opening a case that was never supposed to see daylight again. Not because of justice, not because of truth, but because of prejudice. The officer wasn't searching for answers, he was searching for a way to break him. And in that moment, a man who had done nothing wrong was forced into a nightmare he never asked for. A simple act of abuse of power, one signature, one illegal move, and suddenly, his freedom, his dignity, his future were all on the line. But what the officer didn't realize was that this case would not just expose the man, it would expose him. Behind the badge, behind the authority, a dangerous truth was waiting. And when it surfaced, it didn't just shake the department, it destroyed the officer's own career. How could a single decision meant to tear someone down end up tearing the system apart? How did one act of racism turn into a lesson of justice no one saw coming? This is not just his story. It's a reminder that sometimes, the very walls built to oppress can collapse on the ones who built them. For most people, life is measured in routines. Work, home, family, quiet moments that piece together a sense of normal. For Marcus, those routines were his foundation. After years of struggle, he finally had stability. A steady job at a local construction site, evenings spent helping his daughter with homework, and weekends where laughter filled the small apartment he called home. It wasn't much, but to him, it was everything. Marcus carried himself with pride. He was known as the man who never missed a shift, the father who showed up to every school play, the neighbor who always offered a hand. To those who knew him, he was a good man, building a better future brick by brick. But while his life seemed ordinary, the world around him wasn't always kind. Marcus knew the sting of being judged by the color of his skin. He had learned to keep his head down, to walk a careful line, to avoid conflict. And for the most part, it worked. Until one day, it didn't. In a single file room, tucked away in the back of a precinct, an officer made a decision. Without cause, without permission, Marcus's old case file was pulled open. It was an action that would unravel the fragile balance he had built, an action born not of justice, but of bias. As Marcus went about his evening, unaware, forces were already moving against him. And soon, he would learn that no matter how far you run, no matter how hard you rebuild, someone determined to tear you down will always find a way. At first, Marcus didn't notice anything unusual. He left work like always, his boots heavy with dust from the long day, his mind already at home with his daughter's smile. The streets felt familiar, almost safe. But safety, he was about to learn, can be an illusion. Inside the precinct, a single decision had already set a trap. An officer, one with a history of targeting men who looked like Marcus, had pulled his case file without authorization. It was an old record, sealed and dismissed years ago, the kind of file that should have stayed buried. But prejudice has a way of digging up ghosts. The officer wasn't looking for truth, he was looking for leverage. That night, Marcus noticed a patrol car creeping slower than usual near his block. At first, he brushed it off. Police cruisers weren't new in his neighborhood. But when it passed once, then circled back, and then parked half a block behind him, his chest tightened. He kept walking, head down, telling himself not to give them a reason. He'd learned that lesson long ago. Then came the moment he feared, flashing lights in the corner of his eye. The car door swung open, and footsteps echoed against the pavement. Marcus Hill, a voice called out, sharp and cold. His heart dropped. How did they know his name? Within minutes, Marcus found himself against the hood of the car, his belongings scattered on the ground, hands cuffed behind his back. Neighbors peeked from windows, whispers rising in the air like smoke. To them, it looked like guilt. To Marcus, it felt like déjà vu, a nightmare replaying itself. But this time, there was no new crime, no fresh accusation. The officer leaned close, waving the old file like a weapon. "Thought you were free, huh?" he sneered. Marcus couldn't breathe. That file was sealed. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Every word, every smirk, carried the same message: you don't get to escape. You don't get to be free. Marcus tried to explain, but explanations meant nothing here. To them, his silence was defiance. His protests were lies. His dignity, crushed beneath the weight of handcuffs and paperwork, was just another detail ignored in the report. Hours later, he sat in a holding cell, staring at the cracked wall, replaying the moment over and over. How could a sealed case, something dismissed years ago, be used against him now? He thought of his daughter, waiting for him, wondering why he hadn't come home. He thought of the job site, where his absence would spark questions he couldn't answer. But the worst thought of all was this: if they could rewrite his past, what chance did he have at a future? Still, what Marcus didn't know was that the officer had made a fatal mistake. By reopening a sealed case, he hadn't just crossed the line, he had broken the law. And in trying to destroy Marcus, he had unknowingly set himself up for destruction. For now, though, all Marcus felt was fear. Fear that his entire life could collapse because of one man's prejudice. Fear that no one would believe him. Fear that justice was just another word, too far away to reach. And as the hours ticked by in that cold, silent cell, Marcus asked himself a question that no one should ever have to ask: if the system is built against you, who will ever fight for you? The cell door clanged open, jolting Marcus awake from his thoughts. 2 officers entered, their expressions hard and deliberate. One of them, the same man who had dragged his sealed case into the light, threw a stack of papers onto the table. "This is all we need," he said flatly. "Your life, your freedom, done." Marcus stared at the papers, his stomach twisting. He knew the case had been dismissed years ago. He knew the law was supposed to protect him. But in that moment, it didn't matter what he knew, only what they decided. And they had decided he was guilty, not because of evidence, but because of who he was. His hands shook as he reached for the documents, and his heart sank. The officer had gone further than Marcus imagined, altering details, twisting timelines, rewriting history to fit a narrative. It wasn't just prejudice anymore. It was calculated destruction. Marcus's chest tightened. How could one man hold this much power over his life? His daughter's face flashed in his mind. What would she think when she learned her father was dragged away again? How do you explain to a child that the system doesn't see you as human? The officer leaned in, his voice sharp with cruelty. "You should have stayed invisible. Men like you don't get second chances." Something inside Marcus broke, not in defeat, but in clarity. This wasn't about one file. This wasn't about one man. This was about a system built to bury him, and countless others like him. The tension in the room was suffocating, every second heavier than the last. And then, the sound, footsteps echoing down the hall. Doors opening. A new voice, firmer, authoritative, cutting through the air. "Who authorized this?" The room fell silent. The officer stiffened. For the first time, his arrogance cracked. Marcus lifted his head, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time that night. Because in that single question, everything shifted. The power wasn't just in their hands anymore. What Marcus didn't know yet was that the walls that confined him were about to close in on the very man who put him there. The truth came out. The officer who had tried to bury Marcus with lies was exposed, his illegal actions laid bare for the department, and the public, to see. In a cruel twist of fate, the same papers he had waved to intimidate Marcus became the evidence that ended his own career. Termination. Shame. A fall from power he never expected. Marcus walked out of that precinct a free man. But freedom didn't feel the same anymore. The cuffs may have been removed, but the weight of the night still pressed against his chest. He had seen how fragile justice could be, how quickly a life could unravel when prejudice hides behind a badge. At home, his daughter ran into his arms, unaware of just how close she came to losing him again. He smiled for her, but inside he carried the scars of what had happened, the reminder that safety for people like him is never guaranteed, not even when innocence is on their side. And that's the deeper truth. Marcus's story is not just his own. It echoes through countless others, black men and women who have lived the same fear, the same injustice, The same fight to prove what should already be known, their humanity. We want to believe that justice always wins. But how many lives are shattered before the system is forced to act? How many families have to endure the same fear Marcus felt, waiting to see if their loved one will come home? Marcus survived his story. The officer lost his badge. But the cycle continues, quietly, daily, in ways that don't always make headlines. And so, the question remains, how many more Marcuses will there be before the system truly changes? Because racism doesn't end when one man is freed, or when one officer is punished. It ends when silence turns into action, when stories like this no longer have to be told.